2024 was the best reading year of my life. I discovered a lot of new favorites. I finished amazing series. I had post-book depression 5 or 6 times. I read some stinkers. I read some horrible books that I hated. But now that it's 2025, it's a new year, it's a new day, it's a new life for me. It's time to talk about my 10 favorite books of 2024. But because it's booktube and we all cheat on these lists all the time, I threw some superlatives in there. I threw some honorable mentions, books that I love for a specific reason, but didn't quite make the top 10. So let's just get right into the list. It doesn't need to be said, but I'll say it anyway. This is my subjective opinion. There are books that did not make this list that are objectively better than the books that I've included, but I did not enjoy them as much. I did not like them as much, so they're not on the list. It's subjective, art is subjective, my reading experience is subjective. That's how it is. Honorable mention number 1, craziest premise. This has to go to Fiend by Peter Stenson. This is another zombie apocalypse story, but this zombie apocalypse story is told from the point of view of all meth addicts. All of our human characters are addicted to methamphetamine, and it is a wild fever dream of a journey, so hopeless, so stark, so schizophrenic. Crazy things are happening throughout this entire narrative. So many plot twists, and the ending had me floored. I have a video about this book that I uploaded very early in 2024. That's the first honorable mention. Craziest premise, Fiend by Peter Stenson. At the number 10 spot, we have The Reapers Are the Angels by Alon Bell. There is not a day that goes by where I don't think about this book. The ending floored me. I love this journey. It is a post-apocalyptic zombie novel that takes place in a setting that is quite reminiscent of the Fallout universe, one of my favorite video game franchises. Think Fallout, written by Cormac McCarthy, with no comedic element. This is a very beautiful, idyllic, natural setting, but it's also quite hopeless and stark. Humanity is really fighting for their survival. I love the protagonist of this story. I loved how literary it was. I loved the journey we went on. I loved the mutant characters. I loved our antagonist. I loved this giant odyssey, this great mission our protagonist is trying to complete. And I love how our protagonist is a young woman who doesn't remember the world before society collapsed. So she is truly a child of the apocalypse, and her values and her decision reflect as much. Alon Bell has not written any other books, and that is a damn shame, because this book is astounding. It's always a tragedy when an author writes an amazing debut novel and it doesn't catch fire and then they stop writing. So that's quite sad. But The Reapers Are the Angels made the list because of how unique it was, because of the unique voice, the amazing prose, the great ending, a very cathartic ending. It was a twist ending while also being cathartic. And it's one of those endings that after reading this book, initially, my first knee-jerk reaction was, I hated that ending. But then I thought about it more, and I was like, that was really the only ending that this book could have had. So yes, at the number 10 spot, we have The Reapers Are the Angels by Alon Bell. This is a unique zombie book. Definitely give this a try if that's your thing. Now on to the next honorable mention. This award I'm titling, It's Great, But I Hate It. This award goes to the book that objectively is great. It receives a lot of high praise, but I read it and it just did not work for me. And I'm talking about Sula by Toni Morrison. 2 people get set on fire in this book, and it is still a super boring read. It is thought-provoking. I'll concede that. It's a very thought-provoking, moving read about a toxic friendship and about how 2 best friends can live vastly different lives and how their lives get intertwined and how things get messy. And the ending was just so unsatisfying. And there was a plot point about, I'm not to get into any spoilers, but with the tunnel, where I was like, well, what was the point of that? What was the point of that? Toni Morrison, she can write very lifelike, very relatable, very memorable characters. But I hated Sula, not just Sula the character, I just hated the reading experience. I read this book when I had pneumonia. I sat down, I binged all of it in a day and a half because I'd heard such good things about it. I acknowledge its brilliance, but I did not enjoy it whatsoever. At the number 9 spot, we have Dispel Illusion by Mark Lawrence. Mark Lawrence is severely underrated here on BookTube. His Book of the Ancestor trilogy was very popular a few years ago. His library trilogy has really taken BookTube by storm. A lot of people are talking about it. But the Impossible Times trilogy is his least spoken about work here on the platform, and that's a shame. It's a YA sci-fi time travel thriller, and to be honest, the first installment was just mid, you know, and then the second installment was slightly better. But then I read Dispel Illusion, and this has perhaps one of the most cathartic endings to a trilogy I've ever read. Sometimes you finish the last book in a series, and it makes everything throughout this entire several book narrative fall into place. It makes everything make sense. It solves all the issues with the timeline, with everything. And as soon as I read Dispel Illusion, I wanted to go back to the first book, One Word Kill, because that's just the reaction you'll have upon completing this trilogy. Dispel Illusion was the best installment in the Impossible Time series. Mark Lawrence, really, this was a masterstroke for him. I think after a lot of people finish the library trilogy, they're going to go through the rest of Mark Lawrence's bibliography. At least I'm hoping so, because he deserves it. He deserves all the attention in the world, not just for the self-published fantasy book off. The man does a lot of work. The man is responsible for a lot of content here on BookTube, whether it's directly or indirectly. And Dispel Illusion, the last installment of the Impossible Times trilogy, I loved. Brought a tear to my eye, a smile to my face, and I had post-series depression hard after this one. Speaking of endings, the Fizzle Out Award, my honorable mention for my least favorite ending of the year, goes to Priest of Crowns by Peter McLean. This is the last installment in the War for the Rose Crown quartet. I loved the first 3 installments of this quartet, and I had very high hopes for Priest of Crowns. And then I read it, and I'm not even sure there's really a climax to this story, because I really feel like the ending was very underwhelming. It's a 4-book saga, and everything was resolved in like 11 pages, and then it just abruptly ends. Great, like the twist element of the ending was really good. Like, I love the themes. Thematically, it was a great ending, but in terms of execution, in terms of making it worth it, I really feel like the ending to Priest of Crowns was a letdown for me. One of my bigger disappointments of the year. It happened before the halfway point of 2024, and I've been annoyed ever since. At the number 8 spot, we have a book that has taken BookTube by storm. This series single-handedly has put Lit RPG on the map for many BookTubers. And of course I'm talking about Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinniman. What a unique premise. Our protagonist Carl What a unique premise. Carl, our protagonist, is put into an intergalactic game show where he goes through several levels of this maze, and it's being televised to people throughout the universe. The apocalypse will be televised. His companion, Princess Donut, is his ex-girlfriend's pet Persian cat, award-winning cat, and this cat can talk. And they are the dynamic duo you are looking for. Dungeon Crawler Carl is so funny. I love the setting. It was very easy to root for our protagonist. It's very easy to see the chemistry that Donut and Carl have. But I don't want you to think that this book is all slapstick comedy. It is not. It is very unserious for most of it. But there are some emotional gut punches throughout the first installment that just like alerted me to how much potential this series has, because there's a reason why every booktuber that is reading this book talks so highly about it. It is harder to find a booktuber in 2024, and I guess now 2025, that has not read Dungeon Crawler Carl, because it really is a phenomenon here on the platform. I'm adding my praise to the army, the plethora of praise that this book gets, and I can't wait to continue on with the series. This is a priority series for me. I'm going to be caught up before the midway point of 2025. I can't wait to see what other adventures and misadventures Carl and Princess Donut get into. The next honorable mention reward goes to Craziest Manga, and it's gotta be Fire Punch. This manga is crazy. I had no idea where the narrative was going. The ending floored me. Every volume of this book ended on this like plot twist where I was like, I wasn't anticipating that. It follows a protagonist who has amazing regenerative abilities, and he's lit on fire from an individual who could cast an everlasting fire spell on him. So he lives a life of agony where he cannot die because of his regenerative abilities, but he's lit on fire, and he's Fire Punch. He is overthrowing a like autocratic regime by punching people. He's lit on fire, and he's going crazy because of the pain. And that's not even scratching the surface of how wild this manga is. The premise is the most normal part of this story. The ending, I was like, okay, like, I guess, whatever. This is, I think, only the second manga I finished ever. And I was like, wow, that was something special. I think manga's for me. If you've been watching the channel, you know I love weird reading experiences. I love a nice fever dream. I love not knowing where the narrative is going to go. I love being surprised. And Fire Punch, this is a manga that surprised me. Next year, I plan on reading a lot more manga. I think I'm going to make a separate video where I'm just giving out awards and my top 10 for the manga I've read. But Fire Punch, craziest manga I read in 2024. Perhaps the craziest story I just read, period, in 2024. At the number 7 spot, we have Feral Creatures by Kira Jane Buxton. This is the sequel to Hollow Kingdom, which is on the list of my top 10 favorite reads of 2023. This is a zombie apocalypse story because I love zombie stories, told from the point of view of the animals and pets that are left behind. Our protagonist is ST, short for shit turd, a domesticated crow. I was adamant that a sequel was not needed to Hollow Kingdom. But I had to see how the sequel was because I loved Hollow Kingdom so much. And Feral Creatures is very special. It's a very rare occurrence indeed when a sequel, especially a sequel that was not needed, is good, or even equal to the first novel. And I must say, Feral Creatures made me cry even more than Hollow Kingdom. I loved being back in this setting. I loved seeing ST grow up and mature. I loved seeing how the world changed in the aftermath of the zombie apocalypse. I loved seeing how society and how the zombies have evolved in the past, 12 years. I believe there's 12 years between the first and second installment. I went into Feral Creatures expecting to kind of hate read it, to be disappointed in it. And then I finished it. Upon completion, I was just so happy that the author left it open-ended, that we can return to this world. We can return to this plot line, to this narrative. The ending of this book sent chills down my spine. It was not the ending I was anticipating, and I really hope the author gets back to work because I want to see what happens to our characters. The next honorable mention, I'm calling this the I'm Not Crying, You're Crying award. It's going to the work that made me cry the most, and I'm talking about Orange, the manga. The premise of this manga is our protagonist receives a letter from herself in the future. And this letter is saying, you're going to meet this young man. He's going to become your friend. But in the future, this friend is not here. They took their own life. And I want you to stop it. I'm getting chills right now. Goosebumps. The plot and premise of this manga was so visceral for me. I had such a visceral reaction to this story, to this narrative, because I've had several people in my life who took their own life. And the themes of Orange are really so moving. I don't think anyone could read this manga and not shed a tear, because in only 7 volumes, I believe, I cried 5 or 6 times. It is a beautiful story about friendship and the resilience of the human spirit, about sticking around, about finding value in life, about making sacrifices for your friends, all the great things. If you had a friend that changed your life, you'll read this book and you will see your great friendships, your great friends in the characters of this book. I loved our group of characters. I love the journey I went on. I love how you got all the emotions. I love how, since there are several timelines, you got several endings to this story. So there's an ending in this. There's an ending in this series for everybody. In Orange, I cried often, and I cried hard, and I loved it. But it wasn't the best manga I've read, but I did cry the most. Nothing I've read in 2024 made me cry more than this manga. If the subject matter is not triggering for you, I think there are very few stories that you could be immersed in that are as good. At the number 6 spot, we have a book that I have very conflicting emotions about. This book was almost not on the list because it was by Stephen King. I'd read 3 really good Stephen King books. And I'm talking about The Stand. This is a rather divisive work among Stephen King constant readers. It is a slog. Honestly, I was not enjoying the read until about that way through, until the 400 page count. This book is so long. I was reading it for over 6 weeks. And I was always told about this one scene, the Hand of God scene. And I was looking forward to this Hand of God scene, which happens in the last 130 pages. And I got to it and I was like, did I just read 1,000+ pages for this scene? Because it was very underwhelming. Maybe people were saying, wait for that Hand of God scene, sarcastically, facetiously. Maybe I wasn't supposed to look forward to it. Because it really, really disappointed me. The Stand is both brilliant and frustrating. Brilliant, but also stupid. Some things are like that. I loved the character work. I loved Glenn Bateman. I loved Nick Andros. I loved Larry. I loved Fanny. All these characters were so lifelike. Oh, Randall Flagg. I can't forget Randall Flagg. What a great antagonist. Mother Abigail. Great character work. Great religious themes. The scope of this book is massive. And it really felt like I was just watching it unfold. Stephen King's characterization and his descriptions are top-notch. There are few authors that are his equal. And though I have less divisive emotions about Rita Hawthorne and The Shawshank Redemption and The Shining, The Stand is just going to be a more monumental work in my mind because it really is something special. Will I ever reread it again? Maybe the cut version, because this is the uncut version. Maybe the shorter version. I want to see the differences, but The Stand by Stephen King, I understand why many people say it is far too long, because I think you could have cut out 300 pages, and it would have been just right. So yeah, The Stand takes our number 6 spot. The next reward I'm handing out, and this honorable mention goes to the funniest book I read, and I'm going to go with Critical Failures, Volume 3. This is in the Critical Failures series by Robert Bevan. It's a lit RPG series that follows a group of friends who are being murder hobos in a Dungeons and Dragons game, and the DM gets really annoyed with them and puts them into the world. And they're just a bunch of idiot boys being put into this fantasy setting, and they're realizing that their murder hobo ways have consequences. This is guy humor. This is crude humor at its finest. If you're a big fan of humor from the early 2000s and early 2010s, think Hangover, Superbad, Hot Rod, the dumb type of humor that would never get greenlit today, I think you will find this series very funny. But the third installment is the funniest so far. This series is going to be my guilty pleasure read for 2025 and onward. I loved it. I love our characters. I love the stupid humor. Robert Bevan, you have a nice little hidden gem with this series. But yes, nothing made me laugh more than the 3 books that I've read in this series so far. I can't wait to laugh some more in 2025. We're breaking into my top 5, and at the number 5 spot, we have A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking by T. Kingfisher. This book was a very big surprise to me. T. Kingfisher is one of my favorite authors. I think I've read 5 or 6 of her things over the past few years. She writes cozy, quirky stories. Whether it's horror, whether it's fantasy, it is always humorous, and it is always filled with characters that you just love. T. Kingfisher is the closest I've come across when it comes to writing like Terry Pratchett. She is no Terry Pratchett, but in terms of being witty and whimsical and playful for prose, T. Kingfisher's the closest I've come across. She can write any story and make it engaging, make it entertaining, make it funny, make it comforting, make it a comfy, cozy read, no matter what the subject matter is. A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking tells the story of magicked individuals in this city, because in this world, in this setting, there are individuals that have big magic, they could shoot fireballs, they could cast spells, but most magic users in this setting have small magic. They have magical powers that are very specific. And our protagonist has the magical ability to put magic into her baked goods. So she works at a bakery. One of her companions is a gingerbread man that she's animated. Her familiar is a sourdough starter named Bob, and it's a murder mystery story. You know, our character is trying to solve a mystery and comes across this big government conspiracy. She learns that no matter how insignificant your powers may be, you could always affect change. With enough creativity and enough gumption, you can do great things. I love the ending to this story. Brought a tear to my eye. A very cathartic ending. I wish this was the first in the trilogy because this was really a home run for me. The narrative, the themes about what makes a hero and the life of a hero were just portrayed and depicted so well in this little cozy, quirky fantasy story. T. Kingfisher, she gets a lot of love. She's getting a lot more love on Book Talk than she is on BookTube, but she's getting the praise she deserves. She's getting a lot more hype as the years go by, and I'm glad to see it. And that's why A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking makes my number 5 spot. The next honorable mention goes to the book that surprised me the most, the biggest surprise. And this book, this is easy. Warm Bodies by Isaac Marion. How did a romance zombie apocalypse story make it into one of my favorites, into like lists of books that are like my favorites from 2024? Well, I was expecting it to be trash. My wife read a lot of romance years ago, and she was telling me, like, yeah, the Warm Bodies movie is really cute, but the book's actually really good. And I was like, sure, whatever, babe. And then I read it, and I was surprised by how thought-provoking, by how philosophical, by how intellectually stimulating the read was. This book is a great critique on a lot of the issues that are like societal ills in the modern culture, in like the modern human being. It really talked about how man is separated from our fellow men, how we like when we don't have a purpose in life, it's not really a life at all. Yes, it's a romance story, but the romance really took a back seat to a lot of the big ideas that Isaac Marion tackled. This is the first book in a series, technically. I will not be continuing on because I don't think it could get much better, in my opinion. But Warm Bodies by Isaac Marion, it's a romance story, but if you don't like romance, I think you'll still enjoy it. And the movie's not half bad. At the number 4 spot, we have The Pariah by Anthony Ryan, the first book in the Covenant of Steel trilogy. This was my book of the month in January. I started the year off hot, and this book was so dang good. I was pretty sure that as the year went on, that this book would like drop lower and lower in the ratings, and it didn't drop too far. There are only 3 more books I read in 2024 that I enjoyed more. I love the themes of this story that are surrounding like religion and theocracy and fanaticism and turning over a new leaf and repentance and redemption. And I loved how there's a really interesting play on the whole Robin Hood type of story. I love where this narrative was going. I had no idea the story was going the direction that it did. I love when authors are able to tackle themes like relating to religion in their works without seeming like they're preaching, or without seeming like they're trying to convert me or destroy someone, like destroy your belief. Anthony Ryan tackled so many religious topics in this book in a way that was very digestible and very approachable for people who, even if you're not a believer, and I think he did it in a very philosophical way. I love the action scenes. I love our protagonist. I love Alon Scribe. Alon, he's a great protagonist. I love seeing the story from his point of view. There were 2 or 3 moments that really hit me in the feels. I loved our characters, and I can't wait to finish this trilogy in 2025. It's a priority read for me, for sure. Anthony Ryan, he writes so beautifully. Amongst the best prose I've encountered in fantasy. The next honorable mention, the next reward goes to most thought-provoking book, and it's gotta be Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. This tells the story of a man who goes through an experimental medical procedure to fix his mental disabilities. Our character, he has a lot of mental handicaps, and he goes through this procedure, and his brain and his intellect grows at an exponential rate. He goes from below average intelligence to super genius. And the story is told through journal entries from our protagonist as he grows into the super genius. And there's a very interesting commentary about how we treat people with mental deficits in our society. And I think even though this book was written decades ago, the message is still timeless. The message is still the same. it really affected the way I viewed my opinions about people that suffer from disabilities, about how dehumanizing it is to label somebody something and to discount their value because of what they suffer from. This book is moving. I did not enjoy the reading experience, but I read it and I was like, this is a masterpiece. There are books that I enjoyed a lot more, clearly, because this didn't make my top 10. But objectively, because I said earlier how just because this is my top 10 does not mean these are objectively the best books I've read. Objectively, Flowers for Algernon is one of the best books I've read ever. I just don't think it was an absolute home run for me, but it is quite thought-provoking. It is very tragic. The ending will have you thinking. And yeah, if you have not read Flowers for Algernon, and you're afraid that, and you're worried that it's not as good as people say, don't worry about it. Give this book a read. At the number 3 spot, we have The Six Deaths of the Saint by Alex E. Harrow. This is a short story. It's an Amazon original. It is 30 pages, and it floored me. You could read this book, it's really short, in less than 35 minutes, and I will be very impressed, very surprised if it does not leave a lasting impact on you. You went on this massive journey from the gutter to godhood and back again, all in less than 30 pages. This short story had everything. It had a great hero's journey. It had plot twists. It had great sacrifice. It had romance. It had a very good Despicable Big Bad. And it had catharsis. I love the ending of this book. And if the title's not a spoiler, The Six Deaths of the Saint, you get several endings. I really think I will always remember this short story. Somehow it made it into my top 10 favorite books of all time. That may have been a little hasty. I don't think if I was to remake that video that it would make my top 10 favorite books of all time. But it's really damn good. Bang for your buck. There's very few things that are going to be equal to The Six Deaths of the Saint by Alex E. Harrow. The premise of it, I haven't even gotten to the premise of it. We follow a young woman who gets saved by a prince, and he makes her into his weapon. He saves her from a life of poverty. He gives her a life of meaning, gives her a mission, and she starts to try to strive towards, accomplishing this mission, accomplishing this great goal, and things get in her way. And she encounters obstacle after obstacle, and she overcomes them, and it really is something special. The next honorable mention goes to biggest disappointment, and that's got to be The Raven Tower by Ann Leckie. This book was on my TBR. I added to my TBR at the beginning of 2024. And the reason I ended up picking it is because I was looking up reviews for The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong. And people were saying how, yes, The Sword of Kaigen is amazing, but you know what a standalone fantasy book is even better? The Raven Tower. And I kept seeing that across all of Reddit. And I was like, okay, The Raven Tower is much shorter. I'll read that in 2024 instead. And I read it, and I was waiting for it to become amazing. I was waiting for it to become brilliant. I was waiting for it to be an amazing read, and it never became an amazing read. It's almost made me want to give up getting book recommendations from Reddit because The Raven Tower was just so disappointing. The writing is beautiful. Ann Leckie can write. She's very good at writing from the point of view of non-human characters. That's also very good. But all the other characters were wooden. I hated them all. I did not care for them. The climax was like a paragraph long. There is no falling action. I really feel like this is a case of because our protagonist, because our main character is from a underrepresented minority group, that people just like spammed this book with 5-star reviews because they could see themselves in the protagonist, and that's totally valid. I'm not saying that that's not a valid way to rate your books, but I really do feel like this book had so many deficits that people just overlooked because they could see themselves in the protagonist. And I'm sad because I could have read The Sword of Kaigen instead, and I'm going to have to save that for 2025. At the number 2 spot, we have Stoner by John Williams. I did not think this book was going to live up to the hype. I read Stoner because everyone on BookTube talks about how it is amazing. It is a masterpiece. I went on Book Talk. Everyone's talking about how this book is amazing. It's a masterpiece. And I was like, there's no way it's going to live up to the hype. Because generally, if everyone loves a book, if a book is for everybody, it is for nobody. And I believe that so strongly. But then I read Stoner, and I was like, sometimes, very rarely, everybody loves the same book because it is just that damn good. William Stoner, our protagonist, is, a middle of the road, like academic professor. He's an English professor, and we are basically told his life story. We go through his life from teenagehood to death. The book opens up at his funeral, and it basically says William Stoner was no one of note. No one had anything highly to say about him. He had very few friends. He accomplished very few things that are significant, and his life was basically a failure. And then you are told the story of this life, and you grow to realize that even if your life is nothing special, when it is over, it is still something to be mourned. When someone passes away, a library of stories, so many experiences are just disappear in the snap of your fingers. And this book really captures the anxieties that people will feel, the existential crisis that you have when you're like, what is life about? Is what I'm doing meaningless? Does it matter? Will I have a lasting impact on the world? Stoner tackles all these things. It is a very depressing work. But upon completion, you'll be like, you know what? William Stoner's life was nothing special, but just because I knew everything about this individual, I could not help but love him, and it's something to mourn. It's hard for me to even formulate all my thoughts about this book. It really is damn good, and I recommend it highly. The last honorable mention goes to the coziest book I've read in 2024, and that book is Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldree. This is the prequel to Legends and Lattes, which is a cozy fantasy book about an orc who opens up a coffee shop in the city after she retires from adventuring. And it took BookTube by storm 2 years ago. But not too many people have read the prequel. And that is a damn shame, because this is much better than Legends and Lattes. Is it as cozy? No. Is it as low stakes? No. But the narrative is far more compelling. The story is a lot more interesting. And you really get to see how Viv, our protagonist, like how she became this person in Legend and Lattes that decided that she could retire. She could have a living separate from her adventuring. And this really just makes the character arc of Viv in Legend and Lattes make a lot more sense. I forgot to even get into the premise. The premise of this book is Viv, our adventurer, is injured and she has to take some downtime in this small town, and she encounters a bookshop and she decides to help volunteer and help this bookshop get back on its feet. And if you're a book lover, if you love the feeling of going into a bookstore, you love the feeling of going to the library and looking at all the different stories about deciding which literary journey you're going to go on, this book will be a home run for you, for sure. And at the number 1 spot, my favorite read of 2024, the book that changed me, the book that I will never forget. If you've been following the channel, it's very clear what this book is, because I posted a video earlier in the year, a few weeks ago, my top 10 favorite books of all time, and this book was at the number 1 spot because I read it and it instantly supplanted any other book that could have been at the number 1 spot. And I'm talking about Blackwater by Michael McDowell. Technically, this is 6 short novels compiled into 1 volume, but it's my channel. I can do what I want. I'm counting it as 1 because I want to talk about Blackwater. This is a Southern Gothic masterpiece that follows one family across 50 years in Perdido, Alabama. But what's the twist? What makes this story compelling? An outsider has infiltrated this family. A swamp monster masquerading as a human. And that's a very compelling little, wrench to throw into the narrative. 50 years of drama. 50 years of interpersonal relationship issues. 50 years of political machinations. And at the ending of this story, I had post-book depression hard. I wish I could read this story again for the first time. I loved all of our characters. I loved James. I loved Eleanor. I loved Sister. I loved Claire. I loved all the characters. Queenie. Great, lifelike, memorable characters. I felt like I was a part of this family. And I missed them. I really missed them. This book made me realize that there's a hole at the center of my being that must be filled with family sagas. I want to read more books about like several generations of families. I want to see these great family sagas unfold, because I really feel like stories of that massive of a scope are very easy to become immersed in. It's very easy to become attached to characters when you're watching them grow up across the decades. This book I picked up on the recommendation of Mike from Mike's Book Reviews because he said it was one of the best books he's read. And yeah, this book is something special. Blackwater is a book I will never forget, and I'll be singing its praises forever. I'm going to reread it again one day, but I'm going to need some time because I'm not sure I'm ready to go through that emotional journey. In terms of plot, in terms of exciting things happening, not too much happened. I mentioned how like a swamp monster has infiltrated this family. You'll forget that. You'll forget that all the time. There are some supernatural elements throughout, but it's used very seldom. This is really just a book about drama and dialogue and character development and growing old and political machinations and how this family in the city grows across 5 decades. I think it takes place from 1919 to 1969. And if you're familiar with American history, crazy things happen in that 50-year time block. I cannot speak I cannot recommend Blackwater enough. It really is amazing. It really is a Southern Gothic masterpiece. If you are considering reading this book, give it a try. I don't care if you have to take it in little bite-sized chunks. If you have to take it like reading one book in the series a month, it is worth it. It's definitely worth the time it takes to complete this amazing story. And also, the audiobook done really damn well. So there you have it, my top 10 favorite reads of 2024, along with 10 honorable mentions because it's booktube and we cheat. I can't wait to see what the stories have in store for me in 2025. I'm sure I will read some amazing reads. I'm hoping that 2025 is an even better year than 2024 was, because every book is a journey. Every book you complete changes who you are as a person. I can't wait to see the person I am going into 2026, a year from now. I'm all here for it.